truth. Finally, in this first half, Michael Symmons Roberts reading from his book Drysalter. And on one level, it's a very simple undertaking because what it is, it's 150 poems of 15 lines each in the book. And when you say it fast, it doesn't sound huge, but it is. Because as you read the book, the first time you read it, as you turn each page, your jaw drops because you think the next one can't be as good as the one you just read. And yet it is. And somehow they build and build, and you try and think of what an image to describe that is. And it's like when in America you see those endless freight trains going past, and each wagon is the same shape, but on each wagon somebody's drawn different and more exciting graffiti. And that's what this book is. It just builds and builds and builds. And there's a line in it where it goes, in the poem Hymn to a Car Factory, it says, the sheer beauty of machines is magnified by multiplicity. And that's what happens in this book. The cumulative effect of each poem is magnified by the multiplicity of it. So each poem on its own works beautifully, but then the more you get through them, the more you read the next of the 150, it just builds and builds and builds. And in the end you think, well, actually, these aren't poems. I think what Michael is a chap who owns a 3D printer. I think that's what these are. He's got a 3D printer, and somehow these aren't poems, they're 3D printouts. So when you read them, as you read them, in a kind of 3D pop-up way, they just lift themselves out of the page, and they stand there because they've been 3D printed by Michael Symmons Roberts. Michael.
Thank you very much, Ian. And thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure and an honour to read in such fine company tonight. I was just thinking, there's a sad development in poetry in the last couple of years for poets, and I'm guilty of this, to call their readings gigs. This is a gig, surely, a very quiet gig, but we can just about get away with it tonight. Excise me. So shattered is my heart from endless pounding at my chest wall to get out, that I give in one summer dawn and cut, then lifted. Cupped in my hands like a half-caught bird, it cools and stills. I place it on the sill to keep it warm, and lie down on my bed to take stock of this new thoracic calm. Hours pass, then weeks. The sun through glass dries my heart into a peach stone. Another day, I think, just one more. To be sure, I will recall this stasis so deep I can hear huge clouds of blind fish under ice sheets. Spiders in the leaf mold of distant forests. Your thoughts. The title Drysalter comes really from two sources. One is the ancient trade of the Drysalter, which was on every high street in the 18th, 19th centuries. Kind of, I suppose, an everyday alchemist. They would sell chemicals and powders and poisons to cooks and gardeners and so on. But I also like the nod to the Psalter, the Psalms, and there are, I suppose, nods to the Psalms throughout this book. And one of the themes in the Psalms is that of the others, the foreigners, and what's wished upon them. And I felt, difficult though it was, that I had to sort of address that in some of these poems. This is called The Others. Other people wake up, wash, blink out at icy wastes or plumes of steam. Some are scared by what they have to do today. They dress in other people's many ways. Shirt first, shirt last, no shirt at all. And some resent the clothes they have to wear. If you were there to see them, you would mark the way they thread their buttons through, the moo they give the mirror as they leave. Thoughts of other people are opaque, the weather in their souls a mystery. Some, from restive nights, are slow to rise. Being other, they have not met you yet, but some, with time and chance, could love you if you would let them get that close. Hitchcockian. The birds are taking over. Not in rows on high wires, chittering on roofs at passers-by, fixing a lone child with their red-ringed sinkhole eyes. Not by massing on our windowsills at dawn and tap, tap, tapping with the urgency, hunger, blunt sense of the wild. Not with a skirl and swoop like smoke cut loose from fire, but with a single egg inside each one of us, lodged in the fold between lungs, not felt until the break, la petite mort, when shell cracks and a song begins, an airless, blood-borne trill, a pulse, a stretch of wing, which may be dun wren, bird of paradise, dull rook, and none of us can know what kind is ours, nor even know for sure it's there, this skitter, this arrhythmia, this restlessness, this ache that makes you walk out mid-meal, steal a car, and disappear. So as I was writing these poems, these 15-line poems, I started to play with the idea of, I suppose, poems about a psalmist. If these are, in some sense, nods to the Psalms, then there ought to be nods to the psalmist as well. And the psalmist, as in the original author of the Psalms, is notoriously elusive. There's no kind of scholarly consensus, I suppose, about who the psalmist was, except that there probably wasn't one. There were a number of hands and indeed voices. Some of them came down through the oral tradition. But traditionally, this was King David. And so the myth of the psalmist is part of what I think makes the Psalms so resonant. And it's a bit like the myth of the poet, the whole, who is the lyric I behind the poet? So I tried to write these hymns to the psalmist, or portraits of the psalmist. I'll just read one of them. Portrait of the psalmist as ultra singer. I sing for fear I'll hear the still small voice and not like what it says. I croon to make my skull full as a squat hive, and the honey is my cracked song, my sting in the throat. Oh, I know a bee is not a melody, but I must come to terms with what it is that leaves me hoarse, that keeps my house awake all night. The one I love mouths, "We are lost," behind my back, which means nothing, but this is what I fear the most. Listen. The unsung is unuttering, sucking back into itself. The inverse of words, an unworn ring. Something and nothing. Then one day, the world drops into your hands like a bruised fruit, a buzz with what you take for wasps, but is in truth all human life. It trembles with tidal waves and gunshots, footsteps on the streets of pinhead cities, a metronomic churn of births and deaths. At night, it sparkles like a pomander with billions of headlights, streetlights, fires, warms your fingers with its love and anger. You hide it in a bowl beneath a weight of apple, orange, peach. But as they rot and purse, this orb just ripens, softens, stays. The world's sick sweetness hooks your throat, and all our songs and lamentations coalesce, a hornet's nest that will not let you sleep. The title of this one is a nod to the Psalms. Open thou our lips. Open thou our lips. Because there is a word we must not say, of course we hear it everywhere. The dog left in a cold yard sings it. Unanswered phones in locked houses are desperate to utter it. Newsreaders with currency updates breathe it between yen and dollar. Like many so afflicted, I pace the bare boards of my room and listen to the voice inside my skull intone it as a litany. A bit of me is tempted to come out with it, since none would hear, and it would be a weight off my tongue. But when I open my window, the world rushes in. Moonlust, elm smoke, sirens, everything. I'll finish with this one. Thank you very much for listening. This is In Praise of the Present. If being here and now is nothing more than memory on the fly, then love is just a trace of having loved, over and over recorded. So each new detail, that lock of hair that mimes your cheekbones curve, those blue ghost maps beneath cream skin, become a vivid present and a fix, a holding fast, a living in, not after. This I pledge, to stay awake, for death can keep its dreams. Here is enough, and now time's alchemy. So put your book down, it's so late. I lean in close and say your name, to print it on the face of night.
Thank you very much to Michael and to all our poets who read in the first half. It's now time for the interval, during which please go down to the bookstall and buy the books, and also please join the Poetry Book Society. Let's have one more round of applause for our fantastic poets.